It is very, very, very conceivable. And it has been conceivable for the last couple years. But I think it might be more so this year that there could be an all-West Grey Cup. And I think the thing that's the most worrisome for a Stampeders fan is the fact that the crossover team may be Saskatchewan. It looks very much at this point like it could be Saskatchewan. Say Edmonton wins next week, they beat Saskatchewan, and Calgary beats Winnipeg. That would hand Edmonton second, host the Western Semi against Winnipeg. That would have Saskatchewan crossover and face, depending on who wins. If Toronto wins in BC, they're the Western final. They host it. If BC wins, Ottawa hosts it. Now, playing at BMO Field right off the lake can have some significant challenges in its own right. You've got the wind, and potentially, if there is any inclement weather, wicked wind, wicked squalls, the snow blowing in off the lake. It could be cold, it could be bitter. It has all the earmarks of potentially being a very nasty outdoor game for whichever it happens to be, whether it be the Eastern Semi or the Eastern Final. So say Saskatchewan wins. Let's hypothetically say, like I said, the season's over. Saskatchewan crosses over. They'd get Toronto first. I think that defense can stop Ricky Ray. I think that defense, provided they don't allow him to get outside, which he loves to do, can at least manage how many yards Wilder gets. And if they can slow down S.J. Green and Amonte Williams and Buster Povey, they have a opportunity to take out Toronto. Then you're going into Ottawa, and Edmonton had the opportunity last year, but let it slip away when they couldn't stop Keenan LaFrance. Again, if Saskatchewan can hold down the running game, slow down William Powell, they are without Brad Sinopoli, so that's going to put a lot more pressure on Spencer and Ellingson, especially, to try to move the team. And you're dealing with Trevor Harris, who does not have a great playoff record, in the CFL. So, just for giggles, let's say Saskatchewan makes it out of the East. Well, I would say out of the four teams in the West, and this isn't breaking news to anybody, whoever goes over to the East has definitely has a much easier chance of getting to the Grey Cup as opposed to the teams in the West. Because in the West, you got a dogfight. You got Edmonton that just beat Calgary. You've got Winnipeg, who, depending on the status of Nichols, will have gone from having an opportunity a couple weeks ago to possibly catching Calgary to now going to be into a fight next week to try and beat Calgary so they can hang on to second and have the home field game there, as opposed to having to travel to Edmonton. Everybody knows the West is a gang fight. Everybody knows that depending on who comes out of the West, if they can come out of the West healthy, is the main thing. And the most important thing will, of course, depend on who I think will inevitably face Saskatchewan. If Calgary can get their rhythm back offensively, which they were starting to get there in the second half, if they can get Roy Finch back, and if they can get Jerome Messam going, Calgary should still be the favorites to come out of the West. Now, that sets up and goes immediately and swings all the way back around to the original topic. Calgary and Saskatchewan. Other than a really good first half in the first game at McMahon Stadium this year between the Rough Riders and the Stampeders, the Riders have held their own and really, really well against Calgary, beating them the last game in Calgary. Keeping the game extremely close in Regina in their new stadium. I think if it came down to a Calgary-Saskatchewan breakup, I think it could be an instant classic. And I think it might end up being a defensive classic. I think if the over-under in that game was, say, over-under 50 points, I'd be taking the under. And you don't say that very often for a Grey Cup, but I think for that game you'd have to take the under. If I was Clay Brooks and if I was Dickinson, I wouldn't be formulating a game plan for that game for Kevin Glenn. I'd be formulating a game plan for that game to go against Brandon Bridge. Because even though Glenn may start the game, the first time you get a couple whacks at him, Jones has already showed his hand, and Jones has already showed what he's going to do. He is simply just going to put Bridge in. So now you've got the element of a mobile quarterback. Something, again, Calgary doesn't have. And the importance of having someone, you think back to Henry Burris, and he would, when the team needed a win, he did whatever it would take to win. If that meant running 3/4 of a drive down the field to win the game in the last few seconds, that's what he did. You see, and I'll never give Bo Levi Mitchell the one thing I find interesting is he's always looking downfield. I thought for sure tonight at one point he had thrown the ball and was past the line of scrimmage, but apparently I was wrong because there was no penalty on the play. But he's got that ball cocked the entire, as he's running towards, the line of scrimmage. He's ready to throw it. I think something that may get him in trouble is his receivers seem to let up when they see him starting to run. And then all of a sudden the ball comes to him. Lamar Jordan just kind of has nothing to do with it because he was still in the pocket. But for some reason, Jordan was doing a crossing route, about a 5-yard deep crossing route, and he never looked for the ball. And by the time he started to turn his head for the ball was in his face. If he hadn't been wearing a face shield on his face mask, it may have got stuck. They didn't ever seem, in the first half especially, they never seemed to be ready for the ball. Especially Jordan and Durant. Bagleton did a great job of ball control and moving the sticks. Parker, of course, scoring the touchdown. Colhert made at least one nice catch that I can think of. And it's funny how they don't use him a little more. There's ratio, there's everything that goes into that. But, he was used a lot more, not much more, but a lot more in Winnipeg than he has been here in Calgary. And I thought he was, not a bad receiver for the Bombers. Now let's let that have a rest. We'll see how the Stamps do, of course, next Friday at home against Winnipeg. I would be interested to see how long the starters play, given how they've played the last couple weeks. If I was Dave Dickenson, I'd be asking for, other than the fact you can't wear pads, I'd be wanting a very intense practice. I'd be looking for in the film room, I would be going over what has been happening with the offensive line the last couple weeks, what has been, and I would really be hammering home on discipline. Because without discipline, you can't win, period, end of story. If you're constantly moving backwards because of penalties, you can't score. Seems pretty simple, right? Anyway, at this point, I want to kind of talk about the Flames now, and over the last few games, it's kind of been win one, lose one, win one, lose one. The Nashville game, they got behind 2-0 fairly early. They fought their way back, won that game earlier this week, and then they went into St. Louis and just seemed to lose momentum in that one. And then last night against Dallas, Johnny gets them out to a 1-0 lead. And again, for the third straight game, for some reason, they've done a much better job of keeping their penalties within the goal of Gullickson. His goal has been 3 penalties or less. He's taken 3 of the last. They've taken 3 after brutal starts. After brutal a start of the year. Far too many penalties. But in saying that, they've taken 3 penalties, but they've also given up 2 power play goals the last 3